Yes. Borrowing moral capital from the Christian worldview is the next point that he goes to. And he says, as Christians, we're accustomed to thinking in an ethical way towards others. And we follow what's commonly known as the golden rule. We're to be loving. We're to keep the rules. We're not to be unfair. We have even scales when it comes to our economics. We're not to abuse people. We're not to force ourselves on people. We all take that for granted. And you must not let unbelievers take certain things for granted. You must not let the unbeliever steal from your philosophy. That is to borrow moral capital from your worldview and then pretend he hasn't done that. And so all these things that have come about that fit into the philosophy that Christians hold to are adhered through different portions of that worldview. And so we're not just cutting off limbs to other religions and sticking them onto ours. This provides a complete picture of the basic belief systems for which we go out and do other things like have conversations or raise families or start businesses or continue to run businesses. And so there are limitations to our actions within the scope. And one of them is the golden rule. And so you could say that the entire Western world has been built from some of these presuppositions. And we also see maybe the fall of the Western world is occurring because we view these things as more of maybe a helpful suggestion at best, if not to throw them off completely. And so by saying unbelievers who exist in an independent way of a worldview that doesn't allow for these things, or at least not by argumentation, just take for granted those certain things. We need to call that out and say, whoa, what do you mean by unfair? Especially if you're talking to someone who's a nihilist. Unfair, what are you talking about? Unfair. There is no fair or unfair in your worldview. You can't, if I'm stealing your wallet, you can't call that unfair or wrong for me to do according to you.
Right. And I think this is a really important point, right? That we need to point this out. We can't allow unbelievers to get away with this. They are stealing, borrowing, he says. But Frank Turek, if you'll recall, he has the book Stealing from God, and he makes the same point, right? Unbelievers are stealing from God when they attempt to make these types of claims based on their worldview, right? And so Bonson here tells us that we must not let the unbeliever say, well, we all know that we're supposed to play fair. Well, wait a minute, right? What you should say, he tells us, is, well, I know that we're supposed to play fair, but I don't know why you say that we're supposed to play fair, right? So we're questioning their assumption about fairness. Where does it come from their worldview? Fact is that whatever the unbeliever says at that point, then we have a question waiting for him. Bonson tells us. Why am I obligated to follow that standard? Well, we should play fair because things go better if we consider utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. Well, why should I care about that? Right?
Right.
Things would be chaotic. So what? Why should I care about that? That sort of thing. And so why am I obligated to follow that standard, especially if I can get away with it? If I can get away with it, then what's the big deal, right?
Right.
So what he says is, you see, given the unbeliever's worldview, he has no authority to make absolute moral judgments.
Yeah. But before coming here, I was trying to finish this debate, and I did, between Michael Shermer, a skeptic, and David Wood, who's the atheist. And I'll link it to the show notes here. But just go to the back and forth between the two, and then the Q&As. And David Wood would say, can you give me a standard for how we can tell the difference between aliens doing it and God doing it? Or the discussion would evolve into moral claims. And so, there are nation states that don't let women go outside without an escort. And we view that as wrong, but they view it as right. How do we make determinations? And so he keeps pressuring Shermer, and Shermer keeps just saying, well, talk to the women about this. You wouldn't want this to happen to you. So he takes kind of this very limp-wristed viewpoint
talk to the alien about
of utilitarianism, of just like, well, I'm going to talk about this one standard, but then I'm going to bring in this other standard. Well, okay, then why that standard? And so I think watching that debate does a really good job of showing why, yes, you can talk about, we have more understanding of human dignity than we did back in the day. So was it right back then because we didn't have that understanding, or has it been right then and we just have societally morphed into these different understandings that are equally as right because society has determined it was right at the time? Well,
and how do we know that our understanding right now is right? What if, 100 years from now, we have a different understanding? Does that make what we're doing now wrong?
Right.
And then that new understanding position right? Well, I mean, where do where are we in? How do we, cut this beast off, right?
We can improve society by letting people have the most amount of freedom and having a system in place that allows people to play fairly and retain a majority of what they've earned. And then you have, big industrial revolutions, cultural revolutions. But now we view things as a danger to the planet. And now it's okay to force people to eat bugs. Well, it was okay back then to have people have freedom, but now it's okay for forcing of the insect consummation of consuming the protein in only that way. So at what point in time do we say, well, that's just an appeal to just what you think might work, and if it doesn't, well, then I was wrong. And but we do know that utilitarianism is the best way to go. You wouldn't like it. Well, I wouldn't like a bunch of things you might like. And so how do we come into that conflict, and how do we determine the value of those things? Well, let's just let it play out. Okay, let's let it play out. Well, unless if you're not eating bugs, then you have to. So again, it was a really good debate showing kind of this lack of clarity of having a basis, having a grounding for that worldview. He goes on to say then that unbelievers have an underlying philosophy that they're applying in their argument with you. And you, at this point, are going to start coming back with your apologetic. You're going to start using cross-examination to show the unbeliever that he has made a commitment that takes him to one destination when he thinks he's getting off at another. Right. Show him where his worldview ends. Show him that if he wants to keep the standard of rationality or science or morality or whatever that person's taken for granted, he will have to affirm the Christian worldview. Or we're going to say, here's where it leads to absurdity, or we're going to say, here's where it's happened in the past, and this is the outcome of it. And so as Christians, hopefully we believe that we have the one consistent and only worldview that should come into play. Although I've seen videos this week that people that proclaim to be Christians don't always think that, and that's super weird. But we're looking for a consistent worldview argument that then explains all the things that we can put into the box, which is everything in the universe.
Right. Yeah.
And we're going to call out when that doesn't happen.
Good. Yeah. And so we need to, and that's this is a big, important, procedure that Bonson uses, especially in his debates, right? He kind of attempts to show them where, their particular thinking gets off, right? Where their ticket takes them, right?
Right.
And he helps them to see, or at least attempts to help them to see, that they can't hold to that position unless they affirm a Christian worldview, right? Mm-hmm. Now, his next section here, he calls moral blame shift. And he says it's important to understand at this point why unbelievers insist that they're neutral, even though they aren't. Right? Well, I am neutral, right? He says the unbeliever, according to the Bible, is guilty before God. And being guilty before God obviously is going to have some serious consequences for all eternity. And so the unbeliever wants to insist on neutrality because then the onus is on God for his unbelief and, of course, his wretched lifestyle and sin, right? In other words, I don't understand. I didn't know. I didn't have enough evidence, and so that's a blame shifting. If you tell God that you don't have enough evidence that he existed, that's why I don't believe. It's God's fault, or at least you're attempting to make it God's fault. And that's the point that Bonson is trying to make here. And yet he quotes Paul in Romans 1 that says that God has made himself, manifested from heaven in such a clear and indisputable and inescapable way that all men know God, right? And so this is, you can't use that excuse is what he's suggesting. God has made himself known.
Right.
And so you can't blame shit.
Because again, this is part of our worldview. We're unable to lay the Bible down. We're unable to lay what God has commanded us to do or to say or to be or to believe. And one of those things to know and believe and say is what Paul said and what Paul took to Mars Hill and what Paul took to the Roman people and what Paul took the Jews in the synagogue and what Paul took to the Gentiles and Peter and Philip and James and all, the first century Christians. They took this same message that says, you do know that God exists. Look, here in the temple of all these other gods, you have one to the unknown God. And I'm going to tell you who that one unknown God is. And it's the person who has made, it's the being who made everything. And all these gods are fake. And he has shown this by raising Jesus from the dead. And some laughed because he talks about the resurrection of the dead and viewed the physical as not a completely bad thing that hinders us from true spirituality. But some listened and would hear more on him, and some believed and followed after him. And so we see that in the midst of him talking to people that might not have a full understanding of Second Temple Judaism, but they have this ingrained in their being because we also have the belief that everybody, regardless of who you are, what you look like, what your skin color is, where you hail from, what century you live in, what clothes you put on, how much money you have, that you're made in the image of God. And so you share unmutable characteristics with the rest of us, being creations of God, and being children of God would be through adoption. And so this idea of, well, you're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness is something you have to believe and proclaim to other people, because that's what we're told. That's the standard we're standing on. Now you can talk about deism in general, but that's not Christianity. What we're talking about is having a consistent Christian worldview. And one of those things is we all have a knowledge of God in and of ourselves, and we're denying it by suppressing the truth. So we can't stand on God's lap and shake our fist in his face by saying, not enough evidence, not enough evidence. We had enough evidence, and the Bible tells us that we do have enough. And then why don't I believe? Because I love my sin more than I love the light. I hate God more than I love God, which is none at all until he gives me a new heart. So, that's where this comes from. If I were to say, well, we're neutral. All right, well, prove to me God exists. Well, we can talk about maybe things out in the universe that point to God, but even then is to say that God is knowable in the universe. Well, how do we know that? How can we point to Jesus without God's word, without the Bible? There was a guy who in year zero existed, and he claimed to have risen from the dead, and there's some exterior claims about him. Okay, that's fine. And he died for your sins. Whoa. Where do you get that from? How do I get that out of nature? Well, again, you're not putting this down. You are proclaiming this. This is why you are having this type of argumentation or conversation with this person, is because you're proclaiming to them that God is real. He exists. Jesus died and rose again to save us from our sins. And by putting our trust in him, that's how we are adopted into the family of God. And so hopefully that's what you're doing. And you don't just at the end of it go, there, I've proven it. I picked back up my Bible. Let me tell you how important this book is. Well, hold on. You just set it down for our entire conversation. I'm not sure you actually believe that.
Yeah.
All right. So you will never make headway dealing with unbelievers if you forget that unbelievers are suppressing the truth. They know God. They cannot help but know God because their very existence and ability to think and process information are dependent on him, as Acts 17, 24 through 28 talks about. It's not because you have such great arguments. You don't need them. God has made himself known. Everyone should look at the created world and give praise to God. That's why God can make these judgments on people that have never heard the gospel because it is made known to them. What about the people in Papua New Guinea that don't have an idea of a deity? Well, did they fail to live up to the God that has revealed himself to all creation? Yes. Okay. Well, then they're judged in the same fashion that we all are. And so God can have mercy on who he has mercy. And one of those might be to send missionaries or in some way to reveal himself. But through this kind of second age of the church age, he sent his son, and then through his son, he sent us. And so getting to this type of argumentation of, I don't have enough evidence. The Bible says that we do have enough. And so we want to believe the Bible because that's our standard.
Right. Good. And so, Bonson tells us that when a person suppresses the truth, he asks the question, does that mean then that they're always self-conscious about suppressing the truth? When you talk to your unbelieving professor, for instance, is he or she sitting there saying, I know there's a God and I'm trying to escape that, but I'm going to lie to this person, right? And he says, no, that's not what he's saying that unbelievers do. He says, Paul says that they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They push it down, they distort it, they don't want to look at it, they rationalize it, they try to escape it, right? And so he calls this section rationalizing away what is known to be true, right? They're trying to escape it. They're trying to rationalize, right? So it may not be, they may not consciously be doing this, is the point I think that he's trying to make.
Right. And so that's why kind of the two-step approach for presuppositionalism is, okay, let's assume that your position is true. Why should I care about other people in a world where the survival of the fittest, those who are best suited for their environment and who struggle and survive under the harsh conditions will be the strongest and pass along that DNA to the next generation. So not only must we kill weak people, but we must forcefully breed with people who are of equal stature in value so that we can have a strong species that will continue to survive. Because for some odd reason, that's important. And by important, I mean, it's important to the general scope of evolution to kind of keep us going on. Although to say that might put too much emphasis on personhood within who evolution is. and so, why don't we do that? Well, because we care about human dignity, or society is best formed in this type of environment. Well, let's just try. Let's just try to do it this way because.
Well, especially if you're claiming that that's the way nature operates anyway, right? So why are we going against it? Right?
Yeah. Gazelles might do your way of community and huddling together, but the lion comes in and takes the food out of the mouths of the tigers. And so that's perfectly fine for that. So let's continue that model. We need more lions, and thank you, tigers, for doing all the hard work. But I'm more important than you, and I'm going to go take over this other pride. But first, I'm going to kill all the children over there because they're not mine. Okay, well, by what standard are we going to say that shouldn't happen? Stop, pause. I wouldn't like that. You wouldn't like that either. But I can do it.
We all agree that we wouldn't like it. Right. We have a good reason why it's bad.
Exactly. And that's the second approach. That is the second approach is to say, but I have a reason why we have that feeling of, well, that's not fair. whoa, fair out in the world is survival of the fittest, and kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. And so I don't know what this is talking about. So there's our two-step approach for presuppositionalism, is saying, let's take your standard and see if it fits with what you're saying. And then let me tell you about the better standard. And so again, that's when you have to always have the Bible in your hand, because that's the standard. And you shouldn't shy away from that, because that's exactly what you believe. All right. So they try to escape it, right? But they can't do it. They can't get away from knowing the true God. And that's why they're guilty before him. In the act of suppressing the truth, the unbeliever is in contact with the truth.
So you can't push something down without touching it, pushing it, right? Contacting it, right?
Right.
Can't suppress it without contacting it.
Yes. Having these moral claims that we're just saying, well, let's think about other people here. Well, okay. You're coming into contact with a thing that isn't physical, but you're still saying, I kind of like this because it's beneficial to me, because then you won't kill me, and I'm a shorter person, or I'm less muscular, or you have the gun and I don't, and so I want to try and convince you that we should all live in a perfect harmony until I can get my own gun or go to the gym a couple times. And so we're always interacting with this, even if it's not that physical form of, well, here's a bone in the dirt, and so here's evolution or creationism. No, it comes in contact with each of those things of talking about 2 + 2 = 4. And again, look at what we're seeing now is, well, that's just colonial, mathematics, and so there may be other ways to do math. Okay, let's do that, and let's put you on a rocket and launch you to the moon and see if you can make it with the new math. Well, why is there this standard that can't evolve math that's in the universe? Why is there something there that's not physical, but that governs the universe? Well, it seems to be the Christians who have a better answer than, well, just random chance, and it brings about the most perfect system that continues to make the bubble that's out of an infinite number of bubbles in a bigger universe possible, because then we can change that 1 over infinity symbol to closer to infinity over infinity, which is 1, and that's why we get the universe. So what do you do when you can't face your guilt? What do you do when you don't want to think of yourself as actually doing something disreputable? Well, you hide it. Sometimes you try to hide it in yourselves, and we hide things from ourselves by rationalizing, by saying, I had a good reason for it. We see this all the time with criminals who know that there's a standard, but rationalize it through different means. Well, I had to steal the food because I have children at home. Now, I couldn't have gone to a food bank. I couldn't have gone to a local church. I needed the food right now. And, are you going to deprive me of the same thing that your kids have? No, absolutely not. And so I had a good reason for it. But for other people, that would be wicked. That store owner doesn't have that food that they can sell to feed their family. So you come into conflict. So how do we determine this conflict? Both of them have a good reason for it, but one of them views it as wicked and the other one says he has a good reason for it. Sometimes we do our wickedness so habitually that we stop thinking self-consciously about it. We can fool ourselves, which is actually the second part of Romans 1. So they force themselves to suppress the truth so much that God gives them over to it and says, okay, you want to live apart from me so bad, here, let's do so. And there you get the decline and fall of the entire Roman Empire that conquers the known world. Or you have these nation states that rise up through power of one individual and say, yes, might makes right, and that person dies, and their children are less weak because they grew up in that type of environment where they had a few too many cakes and less training periods. And so then you have the fracture of those societies that's split up from there. And so exactly. we fool ourselves in kind of those two fashions.
Right, exactly. And so he says, the reason why, they would like you to think that they are neutral is that it's one of the ways that they suppress the truth and unrighteousness, right? Well, let's be neutral, right? And that's a way of suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. They know God, but this is one of the ways in which they don't have to face up to God. He says, We don't think about religion in biology class. We don't bring Christianity in when we're talking about literature or philosophy or whatever it may be. We're going to be neutral. So even though they know God, they're pretending they don't, he tells us. And the result of this is that they will become foolish, as Paul says, in their thinking.
Right. Right. And again, this is not something that they're sticking their fingers in and saying la la la, but they're coming up to things where it seems to go against what their ultimate belief should lead them to. And they're taking a different approach. And what you're doing is you're pointing that out and saying, well, shouldn't you say that since all life is unfair, we shouldn't care about this way? And the only reason to follow the law is because there are other people with guns who are more powerful than you to stop you from doing that. So you shouldn't do things because they're good, but because there's enough powerful forces behind this. And so that's, Bakari and Bentham's cause of crime is to make the laws so reflexive of punishment that you increase the pain for the little pleasure that offsets out of doing the crime of rape or murder or theft or arson or whatever it might be. And so that's one of the ways we can kind of point that out. But the other way is to say there is a God and he made the world in a certain way and he made you in his image. And one of those ways in which you are made is reflective of all humanity so that they structure themselves in a way that seems to be supportive of things like marriage or trust and fairness and the golden rule. Why is the golden rule in all these other different religions? Yes, exactly. And why are bone structures made in a similar fashion? That's that common designer retort that we can make. In the chapters that follow, then he's going to say that that he will teach you to exploit that foolishness so that they can see the implications of their views, which we kind of hit a little bit here. Mm-hmm. That they know the same God you worship. They believe in rationality. They believe in science. They believe in uniformity of nature. They believe in moral absolutes. They believe in the dignity of man. And they shouldn't. But why do they? They know these things, but they have no right to appeal to them. And you're going to have to take those things away from them and say, the only way you can think this way, the only way that you can justify believing in those things is by admitting the truth about God I worship as a Christian. And so again, it's that made in the image of God. It's knowing and then suppressing the truth and righteousness. And we believe that because that's what the Bible points out. And also it's what we see reflective in nature according to our worldview. And so the book of Scripture and the book of nature seem to pass through each other. And we see the truth is evident in both these things because, well, why are these universal things? Why has man for millennia looked up to the heavens and said, why am I here? Well, who cares? The lion doesn't do that. The bear doesn't do that. The bear cares about the cubs and sometimes not even about their cubs, but other people's cubs that they've adopted. Well, why is that? And so that's what we want to look at here with the next chapter, talking about looking at what is philosophy and why is it important? Right.
Yeah. Good. So against all opposition, defending the Christian worldview, Greg Bonson.
That's right. And so thanks again for holding out for Tony. That's why we all come back here for Tony. That's why I keep coming back here, at least personally. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully you'll see once again that we're just continuing this over. It's just an hour difference between us, and then a couple 100 miles here and there. So it's not even that we're talking past each other. I'm talking down to Tony, and Tony's talking up to me. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.